Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to this explainer where we are taking on literally the ultimate human question. Does God exist? Today, we are going to unpack a completely fascinating, sprawling 2-hour debate between two incredibly sharp, heavyweight thinkers. And listen, this isn't your standard cable news shouting match, not at all. It is a deep, philosophical exploration of the universe, logic, and basically our entire place in it. To make it super easy to follow, we are going to break down their complex arguments into clear visual takeaways. Let's get started. So, here is our roadmap. We've organized this massive discussion into 6 digestible chapters. We'll start with the existence of God, move into the origins of the universe, tackle science and faith, dive into the heavy question of suffering, debate human morality, and finally wrap it all up with a conclusion. Section 1. Existence of God, a debate. Setting the stage for logic and reason. Before our debaters even began crossing swords, they had to agree on the rules of engagement. I mean, when discussing something as vast as the existence of a creator, what standard do we even use? Well, the standard chosen here wasn't religious scripture, but pure, unadulterated logic and reasoning. So let's meet our debaters. We have Mufti Shamail Nadvi, an Islamic scholar and academic who argues that a creator is an absolute logical necessity. And we also have Javed Akhtar, a celebrated poet and outspoken atheist who argues from a strictly rationalist, naturalistic framework. We are looking at 2 entirely different worldviews here, and my goal today is simply to present their absolute strongest arguments impartially, so you can weigh them for yourself. Mufti kicks off the debate with this absolutely brilliant analogy. He argues that science shouldn't actually be the standard used to prove or disprove God. Why? Well, because science deals with empirical evidence in the physical world. God, in his worldview, is a non-physical, metaphysical reality. Therefore, demanding physical scientific proof is like using a metal detector to find plastic. You are simply using the wrong tool for the job. Section 2. Origin of the universe and logic. Clash 1. The first cause. Okay, so if science is the wrong tool, we have to rely on logic to figure out how everything began. Mufti presents a really interesting thought experiment. Imagine you're walking alone on a deserted island and you suddenly find a pink ball. Your immediate thought would be, wait, who put this here? Why is it pink? Why is it round? You intuitively know it didn't just pop into existence out of thin air. Mufti argues that if you expand that ball to the size of the entire universe, the core question really doesn't change. Complex, specific designs naturally demand a designer. To build on this, we need to understand the concept of contingency. Something is contingent if it basically depends on something else to exist. The pink ball is contingent, you and I are contingent. Mufti argues that the entire universe, which is bound by time and space, is also contingent. It didn't have to exist, and it certainly can't sustain itself out of absolutely nowhere. So, if the universe depends on a cause, what caused that cause? And what caused that cause? This brings us to infinite regress, which is basically an endless, backward-reaching chain of creation. Mufti points out that, practically speaking, an endless chain of causes is logically impossible. It's like a line of falling dominoes. You have to eventually hit a starting line. You must arrive at an uncaused, independent, necessary being that started the whole shebang. But Javed comes right back with a razor-sharp rebuttal. He asks, hey, if we are willing to accept the mind-bending concept that a God has simply always existed without a creator, why can't we just stop one step earlier? Why can't we just accept that the universe, or maybe a multiverse, has simply always existed in some form? Section 3. Science, Faith, and Proof. Clash 2. The burden of proof. So when 2 sides are looking at the exact same universe and coming to completely opposite conclusions, who actually bears the responsibility of proving their claims? Fundamentally, the 2 sides disagree on the very definition of the word faith. Mufti argues that valid faith isn't blind at all. It must be backed by heavy logic and reasoning, exactly like the contingency argument we just discussed. Javed completely disagrees with that. For him, faith is, by definition, a demand from religion to surrender your logic and believe in something without any concrete proof. To explain who actually needs to provide the proof here, Javed invokes a famous philosophical concept called Russell's teapot. Imagine I claim there is a tiny teapot orbiting Mars right now. You can't technically disprove it because it's way too small for your telescopes, but that doesn't mean you should just believe me. Javed argues that the burden of proof always falls entirely on the person making the extraordinary claim. Believers claim God exists, therefore, they're the ones who must prove it. Javed's stance essentially boils down to this one thought. If you can prove it, you don't need faith. He points out that we don't need faith to believe in the North Pole, right? Because we have hard evidence it's there. The very fact that religions demand faith suggests to him a distinct lack of verifiable proof.
Now, if logic and evidence are our battlegrounds, how do we explain the reality we see around us every single day? We have to ask the most difficult, emotional, and heavily debated question of this entire explainer. If an all-powerful, totally merciful God exists, why is the world filled with so much pain and tragedy?
Section 4. The question of evil and suffering. Clash 3. The climax of the debate. This is really the emotional core of the debate. This is where we move away from abstract concepts of galaxies and floating teapots down to the gritty, often painful reality of human existence. Mufti defends the existence of suffering with 3 key points. First, he argues God isn't just merciful, but all-wise, operating on a cosmic level we can't fully comprehend. He compares pain to a doctor giving a child a painful injection. The child only feels the sting, but the doctor knows it's absolutely necessary for the greater good. Finally, he argues this world is fundamentally a test, and for a test to mean anything at all, humans must have free will, which unfortunately means humans can choose to do really evil things to each other. Javed vehemently rejects this defense. He argues that looking at immense worldly tragedies, like innocent children dying of starvation or in horrific conflicts, and comparing that to a doctor's injection is simply unacceptable. For Javed, if an omnipotent, omnipresent being is silently watching these atrocities happen without intervening, that being is entirely unjustifiable. He argues that nature isn't part of a grand test. Nature is simply indifferent to us.
Section 5. Morality, nature, or God. Clash 4. Human justice.
Now, if nature is completely indifferent, as Javed suggests, then where does our deep internal sense of justice, right and wrong, actually come from? Javed views morality as totally subjective, rules invented by human beings simply so we can survive together in societies. Conversely, Mufti argues that morality must be objective and handed down by a creator. Why? Because if morality is just a human agreement, then if a majority of humans suddenly agree that something evil is good, like, say, genocide in Nazi Germany, we would literally have no higher standard to call it wrong. To really illustrate his view of subjective morality, Javed uses the left-hand drive analogy. Think about it. In nature, a lion eats a deer and doesn't go to jail, right? There is no natural justice. So humans invented justice. Morality, to Javed, is just a societal agreement, exactly like agreeing to drive on the left side of the road. It isn't some divine truth. It's just a practical rule we made up to prevent traffic jams and total chaos. But Mufti counters with his own brilliant visual. Imagine walking through a wild, chaotic forest. Now imagine walking into a beautifully curated garden and seeing the words "I love Javed Okhtar" perfectly spelled out in blooming roses. You would never in a million years assume the wind and natural selection just randomly planted those seeds in that exact shape. Mufti argues that the complex design of our universe and the intricate moral codes within us are exactly like those perfectly arranged roses. They loudly imply a designer. Section 6. Conclusion. What is your perspective? Leaving it up to you. Wow, we have covered a massive amount of philosophical ground today. But remember, the goal of this explainer was never to declare a winner. It was to equip you with the absolute clearest versions of both arguments. To summarize the amazing intellectual journey we just took, notice how perfectly these arguments mirror and oppose each other. On origins, we have the necessity of a creator versus the eternality of the universe. On proof, we have a logical deduction versus the burden of evidence. And on suffering, we see it as a test of free will versus proof of an indifferent nature. Which leaves us with one final, lingering question for you to ponder. Are we the product of random, indifferent nature, simply making up our own rules as we go? Or are we part of a perfectly designed existence, overseen by a necessary being? Use the frameworks we explored today, look at the world around you, and decide for yourself. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you next time.